This is a presentation from the Supernaut Network.
Welcome to the Imaginarium, the show where art, technology, and creativity intersect and combine to forge a conversation that can only be found in the Imaginarium. I'm your host, Scott Colbert, and today's guest is New York City-based writer, producer, and director Jeremiah Kipp. Welcome to the show, Jeremiah.
Thanks, Scott. Thanks for having me.
Glad to have you here. And why don't you give the audience a little bit of your background so we can get to know you just a bit better?
Well, sure. I grew up in Rhode Island, the home state of H.P. Lovecraft. And it was very, very rural, like deep in the backwoods. I grew up with my grandparents. They had like a wood stove for central heating. And I grew up in the era of mom and pop VHS stores where like you would go into the store and like you'd see a video box and you'd see something like Maniac Cop and be like, well, that looks interesting. Let me grab that. I just remember watching a lot of horror films when I was a kid. My cousin would tell me about like, oh, there's a scary movie where like these people are fighting off zombies and they move into a shopping mall and they live there, and as a kid, I mean, your imagination takes off. You're like, well, I would really love to do that. So, I think that kids can make the leap from Grimm's fairy tales, which my grandparents had read to me, where like Hansel and Gretel get lost in the woods and they encounter a witch, to something like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. They're really no different. And I think a kid, if they're with the right parents, can kind of handle like horror movies, because I remember being scared all the time when I was a kid. Just like the world is scary, the world is bizarre and weird, and everything is bigger than you. So I sort of immediately identified with horror films. And when I was 12, my grandparents bought just a VHS camcorder. I think they meant to record like weddings and family picnics with it and stuff like that. But I immediately co-opted it and got all my friends together and like, all right, let's get makeup on those 12, because those 12 are going to be zombies attacking the house, and here are some prop guns, and you guys are going to be fighting them up. And it was stuff like that, where like we must have made 300 really crappy movies, just with the kids in the neighborhood. And, my grandfather was always getting shanghaied in to play a mad scientist or something, which he loved. I mean, he was really into it. He's still alive. He's a very creative guy. I mean, he was a photographer, among many other things. He was sort of a jack of all trades, but that was an early thing that influenced me wanting to make movies. And then, I was this kid from the sticks, but I was making films, and we took a school trip to New York City, and it felt like home. It was like, this is where I want to go. This is where Martin Scorsese is doing his thing. So this is where I want to do mine. So I my SAT scores were really high. I applied for a lot of grants and scholarships. Like it was a whole the storming of the beach of Normandy had nothing on my plan to get into New York University, because I really spent a couple years like getting my shit together to go. I sent in my reel. I was 17 years old, and the reel, I hope all those VHS tapes get burned, because like they're such worthless garbage. But it was good enough to get 3 minutes out of it to like go to NYU, and like they accepted me. I moved to New York, and I stayed. NYU was great back when you could afford to go there. Now I think you have to be. Now I wouldn't go to film school. I would just go to the School of Life, because like you can learn everything you need to know about making a movie by buying a camera, getting Final Cut Pro, and going to the School of YouTube, and just making stuff. It's like there's no need to like blow your fortune on a film school that is basically going to build more buildings and give more money to the dean, when you could really just pay yourself that money and make a feature film and have a chance of selling it and making another movie. So back in the early 90s, it was a little different for me. We didn't have the tools and the technology that's at filmmakers' fingertips right now. But nevertheless, I was able to keep going after film school. I met with a bunch of like-minded maniacs who were always making movies, and I was able to continue. And it was really around 2003 that I started making movies that I actually thought were any good. And I just took off from there. And, like on the website, there's a bunch of film work, but the one that I feel like launched me into the professional world was The Christmas Party. It's a short film about a kid being dropped off at a Christmas party run by Christians, but they're the kind of Christians who want everybody else in the world to be Christian too. We made that movie in Rhode Island. Even though I lived in New York, I went back to Rhode Island to make it. And it just did well. I mean, it was a festival hit, and then like really cool people saw the movie and liked it. I don't know, Tom Noonan, for instance, who was the villain in Manhunter and in RoboCop 2 and a bunch of stuff, like saw it, and he helped me out a little bit. And, it screened internationally for like 3 years. And the only mistake I made, young filmmakers take note, the mistake that I made when I did that was I didn't have a feature-length script like tucked under my arm. So when I was showing the film, people were like, "Do you have a feature?" And I was like, "Oh, sure." And then I'd go home and furiously write it. But I mean, for me, writing is a slow process. It takes a long time, and I wasn't ready, So that's the cautionary tale part of that story, is that my short film did great. It actually got me started working in the film industry and getting paid to direct. Canon hired me to direct a bunch of commercials for them, but I didn't have a feature-length script. And that's, after that, I realized opportunity knocks rarely, and those dudes with money are not always there. So I do have a few feature-length scripts tucked under my arm now, but I didn't then, and that was a terrible mistake. Nevertheless, though, I mean, The Christmas Party did get me started, and it allowed me to work and allowed me to start my life as a freelance film director.
Let's talk about The Christmas Party a little bit, because I watched that, and I will say that I watched just about everything that was on your website, and I urge everybody to go over there and check all the stuff out, because it's some fantastic work, which is one of the reasons I really, once I saw some of the stuff you were doing, I was really excited to have you on the show. Christmas Party seems to be probably one of the more straightforward pieces of work that you've done.
It is, yeah. It's a straightforward narrative. When I was talking to my director of photography about it, we looked at a lot of Norman Rockwell pictures and said, like, we want this to feel like a multicolored Americana type of story. And it is very, straightforward. There's nothing surreal about it. It's as naturalistic a story as I've ever told. And, I mean, is it a horror film? I mean, I didn't consider it that way, but like when we screened the movie, like different regions responded to it in different ways. Like in New England, we screened it and people took it as being like social realism. We screened it at a religious festival and they were like, "Oh, this is like a cautionary tale," But, other places, like I think it was San Francisco, they treated it like it was a straight up horror film and like programmed it with a bunch of horror movies. And I liked that because the movie has tension in it that builds towards a peak moment where you worry that, the kid, like something bad may happen to this kid. And I liked that. I liked watching the movie with audiences and seeing them get this heightened sense of anticipation and dread and like wondering what's going to happen next. And that kind of influenced everything I did from then on, because I said, all right, I love this feeling of impending doom, and I want to push it even further in my, subsequent work. So it just like, I'd always loved horror movies. It just like took me a little while to like push it further and further in that direction. But yeah, The Christmas Party certainly was sort of the fledgling start of that, of like getting people to feel tense and getting people to feel scared and worried about the characters.
Yeah, because you certainly sympathize with the kid in it. It's
Yeah.
obvious he comes from a broken home of some kind, and a mother who has issues of her own, and he's living with grandparents who are a couple of generations away from him without other kids to play with. Then he's thrust into this totally foreign environment. I mean, that's really, for that kid, that had to have been terrifying for the character.
For the character, I think it was. It's not. It's funny. I mean, I drew on a lot of autobiographical stuff for the thing, like the kid grows up with his grandparents, and stuff like that. He comes from a troubled home, but like, and there were a lot of Christians on my road growing up who did try to snare kids in during Christmas parties and stuff like that. But for me, I was like, I was in school and they were like, all right, write a school paper on religion. So I sort of knocked on their door and was kind of like with a tape recorder going like, hey, I'm writing a school paper about getting saved. Can you show me how it's done? And then they went through the whole damn process. It was a version of what you saw in the movie, only I felt more in control of the situation because I was using it for a paper. So they did the whole process of taking me into the bathroom and dimming the lights and saving me and stuff like that. But I knew that I was in a position where I was getting a story, whereas the kid in the movie is getting sucked into a situation that feels larger than he is, and so he's in a state of terror.
It almost seems like he's doing it simply for acceptance and for the companionship.
Yeah, it's totally a legit way of looking at it because the kid is alone,
Yeah.
and it allows him a way to get in with the other kids and be part of a community and be part of a makeshift family, which he doesn't really have when he's, by himself.
I don't know that I would call it a horror movie either, but it is very touching, and there's certain parts that I thought were disturbing, particularly when he's in the bathroom with the woman who's throwing the party, I should say.
It was interesting because in the script it said like the boy burst into tears, but like we just realized while we were shooting the scene that it was way more powerful if it felt like almost as if you were underwater, as if you were drowning or something like that. That's the direction we gave the kid, which made him which is why he seems so out of sorts and confused and lost in the scene, but I realized when we screened the movie that like by having him not cry, it allowed the audience to cry, and that was a really good lesson, because I think, sometimes when I've assistant directed movies that are somewhat dramatic and they push the actors like, well, now you're going to cry and there's a big crying scene. And sometimes I think actors think that by doing a big crying scene that they're doing really great acting. But like for me, I think it's more interesting to see people holding it in and trying not to cry. Whenever you're watching a character struggling to do something or not to do something, it's to me more powerful. And I think that has an effect on the audience too, because they're waiting to see something happen. They're trying to anticipate what's going to happen. It's exciting. The kid was great too. He was 10 years old when we made it.
There's that old axiom about never work with kids or animals, and here you are with a house full of kids.
Yeah, it was great though. It's like, all right, so here's the mystery of children actors, right? We auditioned a lot of kids, and we auditioned their parents really, like just to meet them and see if they were stage mothers, if they were jerks. The kids that we picked were really interested and they really wanted to be there, and their parents to a person were like really supportive and really encouraging. And the kids that we found and cast were kids who were really well behaved and into it. They were really excited about the process, and they didn't do anything really hard. There was one moment where one of the supporting kids like was pushing and shoving some of the other actors. And I told her like, look, if you don't stop that right now, then I'm gonna take you out of the film. And she's like, you won't do that. And I was like, you bet I will. And then she behaved the rest of the time. So like but it was very, the process was easy. And I've worked with kid actors quite a bit, but I'm always very careful about choosing kids who are not going to melt down. We're in the middle of doing our work, and also I don't treat them like kids. I treat them like adults, I treat them like professionals. And I think that kids like that. I think kids don't like being talked down to. I think kids respect authority if you are not an asshole, it's like, I mean, I was very fair with them, and I was, like I made it fun for them, and also and thus they delivered really good performances and were really game and into it. So I love working with kids, but I've also assistant directed projects where the kids were miscast or didn't want to be there, and that is sheer living hell, because a kid can hold you hostage. It's like a kid will be like, I'm not going to act in your movie. I'm going to climb under the table and not come out, and fuck your movie. I don't give a shit.
Yeah.
So I've been lucky so far, and careful, because I don't want to get saddled with the wrong kids. Thus far I've been fortunate. And
One of the other movies that you made is Contact. It's another black and white that you made, which I absolutely love. We talked about that just a little bit before we started recording. But Contact is a very, very intense film.
It is, yeah. You know, Contact, like that and The Christmas Party are probably the two, not necessarily my favorite, but those are the two that advanced my filmmaking the most. You know, so Contact, we made it in 2009. In 2006, I made another version of Contact called The Pod, which was longer and had more dialogue and, you know, stuff like that. And I never was that happy with how it turned out. So there was a film festival, you know, it was commissioning films, and they said, Jeremiah, do you want to do one? And their rules were, you know, it has to be a certain, you know, like less than 15 minutes. It has to have some gore. It has to have some nudity. It has to have all these elements. And beyond that, you can do whatever you want. So I was like, well, let me take another crack at this story, but let me pare it down to the essential, like cut out almost all the dialogue and, you know, even take the color out of it and make it as spare and cinematic as possible. So the black and white was really informed by that, was like to make something where we compressed it. And by compressing it, it made the movie way more intense. It was also my first time working with this director of photography, Dominic Savilli, who shot a lot of movies for me after that. You know, he and I just had this beautiful collaboration where I felt like he understood light and he understood my style better than anybody else that I'd worked with until that point, or since, really. You know, it's like Dominic and I just had like a really great understanding of one another, and it came through in the images. So Contact wound up being a hell of a ride for the audience who are watching it. And you know, it was really great screening it with an audience, because a part of me was like, I hope this isn't too artsy fartsy for them. And like once we screened it, that question went away, because the audience felt captivated and were along for the ride, and that was something that we felt really strongly about. We wanted to create something for the viewer that grabbed them and never let go. You know, even though it's artistic, we didn't want it to feel slow. We didn't want it to feel boring. We wanted it to feel aggressive. And I'm very pleased with how it turned out. It's one of the movies I'm proudest of.
How much of influences did David Cronenberg have with a movie like Contact or even Painkillers? Because they're very Cronenberg-esque in their imagery.
Yeah, well, you know, I mean, I love Cronenberg's sense of body horror, and I love the surreal. And you know, David Cronenberg is really interested in both of those things. So what I learned from Cronenberg was the idea of taking an idea and making it literal. You know, for example, The Brood is Cronenberg's way of making a film about divorce, where it really does feel like you're getting ripped to shreds, you know.
Yeah.
You know, with Contact, you know, it's like the image of them getting fused together was this idea of like, how close do you want to get to somebody? When you take that leap of faith, it can get very uncomfortable. So, you know, it was like just a literalization of an idea. And I'm indebted to David Cronenberg. Thank God we live in a cinematic world where David Cronenberg was making those films in the 70s and the 80s, and even now he's got you know, he's still hasn't lost his edge or his sensibility. So I feel like I'm indebted to Cronenberg to the point where I don't even think about him when I'm doing these movies. I try to like pull influence from other people, like with Contact, when the two people kiss together and fuse. I mean, that was inspired by a painting by Edvard Munch, which, you know, I'd always loved the painting where these two people are kissing, but it looks like their faces have melded together. And that was really the starting point for the movie, was that, you know, it's like, how do I get to that image? You know, well, what if the characters do this and that and the other thing? And Painkiller, I know that Jerry Jonda, who wrote it, loves early 1970s Cronenberg, like They Came From Within and Rabid. But that one came about because he, in real life, had a terrible back injury and had to take painkiller medication. And then, like, once he felt a little better, he had to get off the medication. And while I don't think he would consider himself to be an addict, he had to struggle with the pain of de-weaning himself from this drug. And it felt like sheer living hell to him. I can only imagine what it was like. And so he wanted to write from that place, that sort of agonizing pain. And that's kind of what inspired him to do some of the Cronenbergian body horror stuff with these scientists, with, you know, inserting this parasite a way for him to get into the subject he wanted to talk about, which was addiction and relationships, where it can be incredibly painful.
Yeah, he did a fantastic job in that, and I was really blown away by Painkiller. Really, really enjoyed that. He makes an appearance in Baggage.
Jerry does. That's how we met. Painkiller really came about because of Baggage. Well, the whole way I make movies is like people see one of them and then they hire me to do another one. So Baggage came about because Rob Dimension had seen a movie called Crestfallen and said, "All right, Jeremiah, I want you to direct Baggage." And we came to realize that it was this sort of movie made in the style of Alfred Hitchcock Presents, black and white again, and very macabre. But Jerry was he was one of the investors, actually. He paid, he put in a sizable chunk of the budget, acted in the one scene, and he had such a great time working on that movie that day, and he was so proud of how Baggage turned out that, like, he sent me Painkiller, which was the first screenplay he'd ever written, and said, "Hey, would you like to do this with me?" And I read the script, and of course it was right up my alley for all the reasons that we've discussed. And I was like, "Yeah, let's go. Let's make this." And then we went forth and did it. I should say, though, that Painkiller, the making of it was probably the most excruciating experience I've ever had making a movie. It was just like really difficult.
Was it because of the
In
special
script, like,
effects?
well, yeah, that was part of it, because there was a lot of contention between, like, the director of photography and the special effects people over what the special effects should be like and how they should be shot and how they should be lit. It was funny because I was like listening to the commentary of John Carpenter's The Thing not too long ago. I love that movie. And of course, the cinematographer on that, Dean Cundy, and the special effects guy, Rob Bottin, also were fighting left and right over not wanting to light the creature, wanting to light the creature, how should the creature be presented. So that was not the only fight that we were having on Painkiller, but it was one of the many, conflicts that entire production was fraught with. But I want to also say that the conflicts that we had on Painkiller and the enormous stress and the frustrations that we had with each other, and we were often getting very aggressive in each other's faces, but, like, it all kind of served the movie. It has a happy ending, actually, because we screened the movie just recently at a film festival called Macabre Fair, and all of us were there, the producer and the director of photography and some of the actors, some of the actors and I. And we hadn't seen each other in a little while. And then we screened the film for an audience, and the audience really embraced the movie. The press and the audiences so far have really loved it. And Painkiller has started a really nice festival life where it's screening, I think, 4 or 5 times in the next couple of months, and hopefully we'll go on from there. But like, when we reunited and we saw that people liked the movie, like, sort of all that agony of making it really went away, and we really were able to come back together as a team and give each other a hug and just kind of say, like, wow, we really accomplished something here, and this is something we can all be proud of. And we were able to really bury the hatchet and say, we did something really good here, and it would be very worth collaborating again. And we've already started talking about our next project. So that was one where, like, the making of it was sheer living hell, worse than any production that I've ever directed. But the end result is something that I think we're all incredibly happy with. And it's not difficult for the sake of a bigger trailer or difficult for the sake of ego. Everybody was being difficult because they wanted to make the best movie. And I think that's why we were able to really forgive each other at the end of it, because a good movie resulted from all that conflict.
When everybody's passionate about what they're doing, it's really, I know this from my own personal experience, it's very difficult to want to compromise or even give a little bit, because you have your own vision and you think that's ultimately going to be the best. But unfortunately, so does everybody else.
Yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong. I would prefer for people to, I mean, like, most of the time on my sets, it's a pretty relaxed environment, and people feel very safe, and people are able to, because I ask a lot of the actors and I ask a lot of the crew, and, so I want to create an environment where people can get their work done and not feel agonized, but Painkiller was like that, where, I mean, nobody wanted to compromise, but if you want something to be really good, it's often you have to put forth greater effort. And all of the people on this crew were willing and hungry to put forth greater effort. The kind of difficult that I don't like is when people are lazy or don't want to do the work, or don't want to push it all as far as it can go. So I'll take the difficulty of making Painkiller over the alternative, which would be like the difficulty of like, somebody's ego. It was
Oh,
never
sure.
about anybody's ego. It was about making the best possible film. That's why I greatly admire my collaborators on Painkiller. Even when we were really pissed at each other, I still admired them, and they felt the same towards me. And that's something that can enable you to keep going. Nobody quit. We worked on that thing until we were burned into the ground, and nobody stopped because I think we all felt we were making something good.
I was talking to Jack Thomas Smith on Monday. He directed Infliction, which actually won an award at the fair that you were at over the weekend. And one
Yeah,
of the things that we talked about was the difference between filmmaking now and filmmaking back when he started in the late 80s, very early 90s. And he said that he wished that it was the way it was back then because he thought it was a lot easier to get movies done and actually make a living off of the movies. What do you
it's
think
true.
about that?
I think it's a great topic to talk about, and I do agree with him because back in the early 90s, you had like an upper class of filmmaking, which was Hollywood, mostly. And you had a middle class of filmmaking, which was independent films. Like, Abel Ferrara could get a budget together and make The Affliction with Lily Taylor and Christopher Walken and go out and make the movie. And that was true for a lot of filmmakers, and then there were low budget indie guerrilla style things too. But that middle class of filmmaking, which allowed people to make a living, has gotten destroyed along with the middle class in our country. I don't want to. I'm not interested in turning this into a political conversation, but it is worth saying the middle class of independent films no longer exists. So an actor like John Turturro, like he tries to balance himself out between doing big mega budget movies like Transformers and then ultra low budget character driven indie films, and there's nothing in between. And I had the opportunity to assistant direct a feature that he was the star of, and he said that his bread and butter were those mid-range indie films that your guy is talking about, the Infliction guy is talking about. And that's the world that I came to New York for. That's the world that I signed up for, and to say like this is the kind of filmmaking that I want to do. But by the time my career got traction, that opportunity no longer existed. Now I do make my living as a filmmaker. This is how I pay the rent. I lead a very monk-like, very simple existence that enables me to direct movies. So I don't need a lot of money to survive.
Which is good because in filmmaking, you generally don't make a lot of money.
You don't. No, you don't. If I wanted to make a lot of money, I would have gone into law or medicine. Instead I chose to get into this as a career, and I wouldn't trade it. I love what I do, but it is really hard. It is definitely harder to make a living now than it was in the 90s. And I hope that we can find a way to turn that around in whatever shape the entertainment industry finds itself in. I hope that we're still able to continue making movies and making a living, which is important. We need to support artists and craftsmen, whether they're making horror movies or indie dramas or art films or whatever it is that they're doing. It's unfortunate that, it's unfortunate that the middle class of indie filmmaking doesn't exist anymore.
No, it's a shame that it doesn't because there's kind of like with writing, and I mentioned this to Jack too. There's so much. It's so easy to just either pick up a camera or get on your laptop and throw together an ebook or throw together something and put it up on YouTube for very little to almost no money. That a lot of quality stuff gets buried.
It's true, and like as a viewer, I feel that too, because it's hard to find. I mean, you can find great movies, in the low budget world, and like there are some great, amazing filmmakers, but the way that, but they have to persevere. They have to be able to keep going and find a way to keep going and get their voices heard, and that is, that's the hard work. Making the movie is really difficult, but then like getting the word out about your movie is really challenging too. But I greatly admire the guys who have been able to make their films and get the word out and continue making them. Like, Fred Vogel is a guy in Pennsylvania who's like been doing it for a while, and he's just kind of like an inspiring figure because he's been able to make his movies, sell his movies, continue to develop as a creative person, and make a name for himself, a very small name, but still, it's like he's able to keep working. And there are guys that are like him, and the way that you find them is just through, as a viewer, you just have to keep your eyes open and like keep your ear to the ground, and then you find this stuff. And when you do find good stuff, it's like you're finding gold, but you have to sift through a lot of chaff. The filmmaker, it's like, how do you compete against that? You compete against it day by day. You just keep doing the work, putting work out there and presenting yourself and saying like, this is what I do. And then gradually, like if you keep it up, like you can slowly get people's attention, and then they start to say like, all right, Fred Vogel is a talented guy, and oh, who's this Jeremiah Kipp over here? All right, that's some interesting stuff, and I have people that I'm very competitive with, like Patrick Ray is a filmmaker out in the Midwest who's like continually made like an incredibly high level of quality with his short film work, and he just did his first feature called Nailbiter, and I'm just really impressed by him. And like he and I kind of look over each other, just through social media and stuff like that. And it's kind of like there's a sense of like knowing that both of us have been paying our dues and have been doing this for a while. And in some small ways, it's starting to pay off. At least we're able to continue and make a living at it.
How much does social media play in getting your name out there?
Well, for me, it's huge. I can't speak for everybody. I know that for me, I really respect and admire the bloggers and the writers and the journalists and the people who are out there publicizing and presenting, low budget indie horror, because I feel like we're all in this together. When I present my work, I use social media as a way to get the work out to the audience, to the people. That's the most important thing for me is, getting the work out to the people somehow, because that's why I do what I do. I don't do it just to appease my own sense of self. I mean, I actually think that movies are a way to communicate with others. And that's why I thank God that social media exists, because it allows me to share the work with other people. And also get the word out about my work and present it. And, it also allows me the chance to connect with other filmmakers and find out what other people are doing. The pleasure of that is actually creating some healthy competition. Like there are a lot of Canadian filmmakers whose work I greatly admire, like Alfredo Arcelisi and Richard Powell and Marc Lasser and people like that, it makes me want to move to Canada because I feel like they're able to like continue creating a really strong body of work. And the great joke is that the Canadian horror filmmakers all want to move to New York because they feel like making it in Canada is like big fish, small pond, and they look to the United States as a measure of success. Anyway, it's funny, but I wouldn't know that if it were not for social media as a way to connect people. And so that's like a big thing. And then also, of course, like film festivals and stuff like that as a way to meet people and find out what's going on and connect with the audience. And social media also allows people to be vocal. They can say like, I like this, I don't like that. I mean, of course, it breeds things that are awful, like trolls and stupid shit like that, but but I think social media does more good than harm. And it makes the net wider, for people to reach out and connect with. And I like that a lot.
Also did an adaptation of Edgar Allan Poe's Berenice.
Yeah, that was, well, I work on a lot of projects, and Berenice was one where originally it was going to be part of an anthology called Tales of Poe, which was made by Bart Mastronardi and Alan Rokelly, two great East Coast horror filmmakers. So I wrote Berenice, and we tried to get it going there, but the money just didn't come together at that time. That was a couple years ago. So, we tried to make it in New York, and then we tried to make it in Chicago, and it went through a couple different incarnations. And then I just put it on the shelf because it was like, all right, well, the money is not coming together for this project, which happens. Sometimes it's just like, you work on something and it doesn't occur. So I forgot about it really until, I don't know, a year and a half ago. I was at a film festival, and an actor I work with, Bob Sachi, introduced me to an executive producer named Mike Liddon. And Mike said, I'm putting together an anthology of horror films based on literary works, do you have anything? And I said, yes, I do. And I busted out the script for Berenice and showed it, emailed it to him. And he said, all right, great. Here's the budget. Here's my deadline. Go. And it felt great because as a producer, he was very hands off. He was down in New Orleans. So he just essentially sent the money piecemeal. I mean, he's a very canny businessman. So he sent us enough to get started and then checked on our progress and and gave us the money as we needed it and allowed us to make the film. It was really great because the script, which had been around forever, finally was getting realized. And so we just promptly got our team together and went and made it. And it was very satisfying. And the most satisfying thing about it was the sense of like finishing something that had started years earlier and finally was coming to fruition. But I've always loved Edgar Allan Poe. I think his stories are great. The entire idea of like building a story towards a shock ending is something that I thought Edgar Allan Poe was the master of. And I think that, at least for me, when I'm doing a short film, that structure of telling a story is directly influenced by Poe. David Cronenberg influence that you talked about earlier is like a very specific image-driven thing of body horror, but like the shadow of Edgar Allan Poe, just in terms of structuring a story, to me is much bigger. I feel like Edgar Allan Poe is like has been like the great influence on horror storytellers, especially in America. I mean, he was like the great American horror pioneer.
Oh, absolutely. And it was such a fantastic adaptation, and bringing it into the modern age, probably a lot easier to do it that way than try and make it a period piece.
Yeah, I mean, it's true. I mean, it probably was easier, but for me, I just didn't want to do it as a period piece because Roger Corman had done that so brilliantly so many times that I just kind of was like, well, I don't. Well, I mean, I love Roger Corman's films. I love Hammer horror movies, but I don't necessarily want to make them. So I don't feel inspired necessarily to like go do a period film. And that's why I updated it. It was really more that I feel like I'm a 21st century guy, and I feel like Poe's story doesn't feel dated. So I was like, well, I'm just going to pull it into the present day, or like this sort of version of the present day, and that's why I did it. I mean, I love watching period films, but I don't know if I would, I mean, like if a script came along that was period film, of course I would do it. But as a writer or a creative person, I just don't think that way. So that was why we did the update. But the story itself translated really beautifully. Like when Poe published that story, a lot of readers wrote angry letters to the editor saying like, why are you publishing this filth? Why are you publishing this disgusting garbage? And I think Poe read that and said, oh, good, I'm going to keep doing this because it's getting a rise out of people. But the ending of his short story is what made me want to do the movie. I thought it was just such a shocking, deeply disturbing conclusion. And then, like I was like, all right, we're keeping that, and then we'll just modernize some of the characters and some of the dialogue in a way to build towards that ending.
So I noticed in there's nudity in not a lot of your work, but in some of your work. How hard is it to try and convince an actor that the nudity is required? I'm not quite sure how to ask that question without it sounding kind of.
It's like it's a great question. I don't feel like people ask me it a lot. But I wonder like why. It's like sometimes I wonder if people are just prudish and don't want to ask the question. But like I think it's a great question. I think nudity in movies is great because it's just part of the deal. It's like I think that human beings are driven by a desire for love, money, sex, power, all that kind of stuff. And it's like, well, let's deal with that in the movies. There is when I come across a story where I feel like nudity would be great, like in Berenice, like the character has these perverted fantasies about Berenice. It's like, well, let's just show it. Let's not be afraid of it. This is what's driving the character, so let's present it. I think that's why actors are generally willing to go there with me, is because it's hardwired into the story. It's driven by character, and then I make them a promise. I say, I swear to you that I will not do anything to humiliate you. I promise I will make you look great. And I'll show you the movie first, And if there's anything that you don't like, then I'll cut it out of the film. And that's the deal that I make with them. And I stay true to my word. But because actors have seen my movies and have seen how I photograph people when they're nude, they feel safe with me because they know that they're not going to look bad. They know they're going to look great. They know that the scenes are hardwired into the themes that I'm talking about in the movie. So they know I'm not just doing like TNA bullshit. Yeah, which I also love, by the way. It's like I actually love. I mean, I'm very into exploitation movies and all that kind of stuff. I think they're a lot of fun. But I also think that Stuart Gordon, when he did Reanimator and From Beyond, was making dark, sexy, interesting, transgressive stories. I think Reanimator and From Beyond are great movies. They have a lot of nudity in them. And I don't feel that sort of dirty feeling of like, oh, how titillating. I feel like it's sexy and I feel like it's strong. And that's what I try to do with my movies. So and if an actor, and I try to talk about that with the actor first, so that if they're going to say no, I find out about that early. If I have any doubt in my mind that they're going to do it, then I just cast somebody else, who's willing to go for it. And that's what I like. I like collaborating with actors and crew people who are unafraid, brave, know what they're doing, know why they're getting into something, and they go for it. I think Stuart Gordon is the same because Barbara Crampton is a great actress. Yeah. I love her work. I mean, like she was great in Reanimator and From Beyond, and she was great in You're Next. I mean, she's just superb. But I think however it happened, like Stuart Gordon and Barbara Crampton had a level of trust that resulted in a great scene. Like that scene is unforgettable. It's like scary and weird and fucked up and sexy and powerful, and you never forget it. And I don't feel that way about some other movies where there's nudity. I actually hate it in horror movies when there's like nude scenes and sex scenes and stuff like that are badly photographed or trashy or I don't mind sleazy. I think John Waters is the king of sleaze and he's made great films, but I don't like it when I feel like the actors are getting humiliated and it's not part of the story. It's just bad filmmaking. That to me is like worthless garbage, and that's not what I'm about. But I mean, I can defend a movie like I Spit on Your Grave and say like, I don't think that movie is art. I don't think that movie is, but I do think it's strong. I think it's like, okay, they did what they said they were going to do. I don't think the actors had any confusion about what that movie was going to be. It's not something I necessarily would want to do myself. I feel more close to like somebody like Stuart Gordon than I do to those guys. But still, I think that it's totally valid. And I think that if it's but if it's just trash, then it's like you can count me out. I'm not interested.
Yeah, there's certainly a big difference, say from a Russ Meyer film,
sure,
to some of the cheesy direct to DVD slasher movies from the early 80s, mid 80s.
No, yeah, there's a lot of terrible, like once Friday the 13th and Halloween hit, there were just like so many bad slasher movies with like girls in the shower and it's like, and I mean I enjoy a good slasher movie second to none, but some of them were just so crass and so dumb and so like clearly just trying to make a buck, that it would make Friday the 13th look like Citizen Kane. It's like, and I like Friday the 13th. I like those movies well enough. Yeah, you can tell the difference though between something that's like well done and something that's just worthless shit.
Well, let's talk about something that, going away from the slashers a little bit, because we're going to come back to that when we talk about The Sadist. But I want to talk about Drool. I talked about it with you a little bit before the show, but Drool was really one of the most unique things I've seen in a long time.
Thank you. Yeah, Drool was, first of all, I love, it's one of the movies that I made that I really stand behind it. I really love the movie. And it's interesting because it came about really quickly. It was, I have a friend, Laura Lona, who is part of an art collective. And, she was like, hey, let's make a film together. And she wanted to make something daring and artistic and bold and striking, but she had a very specific mandate, which was she's like, I want it to feel like theater of cruelty. And I said, I think I can do that for you. So I wrote up a little treatment and sent it her way, and we cast it, and and then the shoot itself was really fast. We shot it in like 3 hours and edited it in like half a day. And there was something about the adrenaline of doing it so quickly allowed it to be more instinctive and surreal and primal. And then, when we started presenting it, we were really happy because audiences were able to connect with it on some level. So people were able to watch it and be really into it. And like we made that movie, 2010 maybe, I'm not sure, a couple years ago, and people still watch it and people still get something out of it, and that makes me feel really happy because it was something that we did just really fast. We just wanted to make an experimental surrealistic film that dealt with a couple of things that we wanted to deal with, and then it wound up striking a chord and being really powerful. And the one thing I should say about Drool is, like, I've tried to do stuff like that a couple times since, and Drool just remains like the most powerful example of it. Just like the elements are in place to make something that was strong, and we were just really lucky to have done it that way.
What did you use for the Drool?
Well, we it's like we didn't have a special effects team like we did on Painkiller and Baggage and some of the other films I've worked on. It was just us. So like there's a performance artist named Karen Finley who covers. She just like she does shit like covers herself in chocolate and then does a monologue and crap like that. It's kind of pretentious, but like so we just went to the supermarket and we're like, well, like honey, if it's in black and white, will look like alien ambiotic fluid. So let's get that. So we just got like a bunch of jars of honey and covered them in that, and like that became the Drool, and like that made it really, as enjoyable for the actors as it could possibly be because it tastes pretty good. And like it kind of reminded them, for something that's so adult, it's like it reminded them of being like little kids playing in mud puddles and stuff like that because they're covered in this honey and it tastes pretty good, and it's just kind of like, and like I don't know, it's a weird thing about making strange movies or horror movies is like, like people watch the movies and it feels strange and fucked up and weird. But in the making of it, we, like in that case, we were just laughing a lot. It was just like, this is so funny. Like what we're doing is so ridiculous, and like children do this. Like, and we're grown adults. We approached the work seriously, but we didn't take ourselves seriously. It's kind of hard to take yourself seriously with
when you're covered in honey
and stuff like that. But the actors were very brave and like really wanted to go for it. And they were terrific. They were really great to work with.
And the editing on that was really top notch.
Yeah, the editor was Scott W. Perry, who is a filmmaker in his own right. He's the creative mastermind behind a web series called In Fear Of. And Scott, he's a guy that I worked with for a couple years, and we shot the film. I was like, Scott, you want to do this? And he said yes. Cut it together really fast, and like we didn't even do that many passes in the edit. I mean, it was like I think 2 passes and we were done, which is like different than the way I usually work, which is to do many passes. I mean, I've been in post on projects for like 6 to 9 months until I feel like it's ready to go. But it was with Drool, it was just a really fast process. But Scott was definitely the man for the job. I mean, he understood what we were trying to do, attacked it in that spirit. I was really proud of his work and really impressed by his work.
Well, let's go back to slashers
sure.
for just a second, and let's talk about The Sadist, which stars Tom Savini. And there's a little bit of a history with this movie, apparently.
It's interesting to talk about because I wanted really badly to do my first feature, and this was back in 2010, so it was not long after I did Contact. And I came upon these 2 very young producers in Connecticut who had never worked on a movie before in their lives, but they had some money and they had this slasher script. And they said, hey, do you want to direct this? And I knew walking into it that these guys were going to be not my kind of guys. They were kind of more interested in doing a lot of coke than in making a good movie. But I was like, you know what? I mean, I think of myself as a professional. I was like, I want to do. I mean, I love slasher movies. Let's get this thing going. So I pulled in my crew from New York. I pulled in a lot of actors that I've worked with before, and then we got Tom Savini through Debbie Rochon, who I'd worked with on something, and Debbie got Tom, and then Tom was like, sure, I'll be the villain. And I'll talk about Tom Savini for a minute because any problems the movie had nothing to do with Tom. Tom has a certain reputation for being a dick, but he's not. I mean, like the people who knew that I was hiring Tom Savini, that knew him from conventions and that whole world, said Tom is he's a real jerk. He's gonna crush you under the wheel. And yet I called up a lot of film directors who had worked with him, and they had an opposite story, which was like, Tom's great. He's there for the movie. He's very supportive and encouraging. He loves playing villains and he loves this job. And that was the Tom Savini that I met. So Tom played the killer. The movie is kind of like Bad Rambo, where he's like a post-traumatic stress disorder veteran who's run amok and is killing campers in the woods and so on, and when Tom showed up, you could tell that, like we didn't have a good start because he walked onto the set and was like, put the camera over here and do everything that I say. And I said, well, Tom, the director of photography and I cut together like 2 minutes of footage from the movie. You want to take a look at it? This was Dominic Sevilla, who shot Contact, my great friend who I was telling you about before. So we showed Tom 2 minutes of footage because we were like 2 weeks into principal photography at that point. So Tom watched it and was like, oh, good. All right, let me go get ready. And then he promptly starts covering himself in dirt and getting into character and like doing all this stuff. And from then on, he was incredibly supportive of the crew and the cast and fought for us with like the producers were feeding us dry rice and salad, it was terrible conditions. And Tom was like, I want these guys to get filet mignon. Oh yeah, because they took Tom out to dinner and like, let's talk about Dawn of the Dead. And he was like, no, let's talk about food. Feed these guys filet mignon tomorrow. And like Tom would do stuff like that, and it really made me happy that he was on our side. So unfortunately, we finished principal photography, and Dominic and I edited together the rough assembly, which was really rough. It was like, I mean, we had a rough cut, which most of the movies that you've seen on my website have a rough cut that is like the weakest version of the film. It's just like patched together with no art to it. Usually movies just need a lot of finessing in the edit. And this was like the roughest of rough assemblies, just so we could show something to the producers. So we show it to them and then immediately get fired. They fired me and they fired the editor, and they were like, you guys are terrible filmmakers and you don't know what the hell you're doing, and get the fuck out of here. And I was like, well, no, this is the rough assembly. It's like, we got to keep going. We have, and they were like, no, we'll do this ourselves. And that was in 2011, January, that we got fired. And then, and then we're spending years like waiting for them to finish. They do some second unit photography, but none of the actors want to come back, and none of them do. Like none of the crew, none of the actors return. They're like, no Jeremiah, no us. So they added a bunch of new characters, I guess, and they hired a second unit director and a new director of photography and shot some stuff, and got an editor and a composer who weren't very experienced. And 4 years later, they finished the film, and I haven't seen it. I don't know. I don't have any idea what it looks like. And they did get a distributor called iFilms releasing, but I contacted some filmmakers who went through those distributors, and they were like, those distributors are horrible. They don't get the word out about the film. So I don't know. The Sadist was a cautionary tale, where it's like I wanted to make a feature so badly that I went into bed with people that I probably shouldn't have. And ever since, I just told myself I'm never going to make a movie again putting myself in a situation like that. So I've been very, very careful about who I work with as producers. And ever since, it's been like happy customers and good situations, because we vet each other really strongly first, so that I don't get into a situation where somebody's going to fire me. It's like I like to think of myself as a talented, professional. And I want to work with people who are like-minded, and that's been the case ever since. So these two guys that I made the film with, the Sadists, I would just be very careful not to do that again. I'm glad I did The Sadist because I learned a lot. I'm glad I did The Sadist because Tom Savini was so great to work with. And he said very nice things about me over the past 4 years. But I don't know. I don't know what, I mean, I know the movie is out there. Yeah, I don't think, the producers they're not very good producers because they still haven't managed to fulfill their delivery requirements to the distributor. So hopefully people will see it this year. But I don't know. It's been a long and arduous journey to get it there, and I'm as curious to see it as anybody. I hope it turned out okay, but I just don't know.
Are they still going to have your name attached to it as director?
It is, yeah. It's like I'm still credited as director. If people go to the Internet Movie Database, like I'm still there, and they did a screening of it in Connecticut at some con, and I was credited for that, but nobody I know has seen it. I don't know. Yeah, my name is on it. I'm not going to turn it into an Alan Smithy movie. It's certainly helped in some ways that like I've directed a feature. But yeah, it was just like that was a rough ride, and I just like at this point I just want the movie to be finished, and I would love for audiences to be able to see it. I mean, even if it turned out badly, make the movie to be on a shelf somewhere. I mean, the producers haven't produced anything since. I mean, they haven't done another movie since The Sadist. So I don't know. I mean, it kind of kills me a little bit because if we'd stuck together, then, I would be doing what I do with my movies, which is like getting people to review it and like sending it to festivals and, acquiring a distributor that way. But they just chose to go a different direction. That's unfortunate, I think.
The trailer that's on your website and on YouTube, is that one that you cut together, or is that from the producers?
Yeah, we cut it together. That was the first thing that we did was Dominic Sevilla and I cut that trailer together. We color corrected it. We put it in 2:35 widescreen. That's ours. That trailer is something that we did. And so that's kind of I mean, I did all that to make this kick-ass 3-minute trailer that I can call mine. I love the trailer. I think that the trailer is the movie. It's representative of the movie that we wanted to make, which was a kick-ass B movie that would be solidly entertaining.
Yeah, it's definitely a good trailer. It certainly made me. Well, I would have wanted to see the movie anyway, just because of Tom Savini. It draws you in and makes you want to see the rest of the movie.
Yeah, I want to see the rest of the movie too.
One of the last things I want to ask you about, and I have to thank you for this one. You did a music video for Jonathan Spottiswoode.
Oh, Spottiswoode. Did I? I mean, like I
it was Mastermind.
Say again?
Mastermind.
Oh, that's for Aaron David Gleason. Spottiswoode's another music video guy. Like, I don't think I've done a video for him, but he's great. I love Jonathan Spottiswoode's music. Aaron David Gleason is the guy I did Mastermind with, and Aaron is a guy that I don't know. We found each other like a couple years ago. We did a video called Fate, which kind of had some monster stuff in it, and then he came back around to me last year and was like, I want to do something where we pull out all the stops and make a weird, surreal, science fiction-y video. And one of the things that was most appealing about it was that Aaron was able to pull in this remarkable cast. So people who love Broadway shows will know Joanna Gleason, who originated the part of the baker's wife in Into the Woods, which is a movie now. She won the Tony for that. And then this other woman named Alice Ripley, who's also a Tony winner. But for me, the great, one of the great collaborations on that video was Chris Sarandon, great actor, who horror audiences know him probably best from Fright Night, where he was Jerry the Vampire. Great in that movie. And Child's Play, he plays the detective. Princess Bride, he plays Prince Humperdinck. He was in Dog Day Afternoon opposite Al Pacino. An amazing career. So Chris was great because, he showed up to work on the video. We talked a lot about what the character was supposed to be. And it was a very easy process because he took direction really well. I mean, he's like directing Chris Sarandon was like driving a BMW or something like that. It was like driving a precision car, where you would give him a small note and he would go with it beautifully. So Chris was just really superb, and like he understands the camera better than any other actor that I've ever worked with. And on top of that, a really kind, gentlemanly, open person. But what I found really, what was tough for me was not directing Chris. Directing Chris was easy. We really got along great. We had a lovely time. We really respected each other. It was a lot of fun. But what was hard for me was he went home and he told his wife, Joanna Gleason, he was like, oh, these guys are great. These guys are so good to work with. The next day that we filmed was actually at their house, and Chris was like a PA for us. He was like, what do you need? You need some stuff from town? He would hop in his truck and drive into town and buy and like pick up some stuff for us and bring it back to the house. And that was the part that I found. I mean, he loved it. I mean, he was happy to help out and roll up his sleeves and was very generous and, just like was there to have a good time and liked us so much that he spent the day with us not acting, but just helping us like a minion, and that was the part where it was like, you're Chris Sarandon. You're the guy who was nominated for an Academy Award. What the hell are you doing driving around in your truck picking up stuff from us from the toy store for our video? And then he cooked dinner for us, and he comes from a Greek family, so he made us this delicious Italian feast. Those are the things that I found hard to deal with. I mean, that's when I'm not a fanboy, and like the only autograph that I really want is somebody signing a contract saying they'll be in the movie. So I'm not into that kind of stuff, and when I'm directing a name actor like Tom Savini or Chris Sarandon, I treat them like an actor, and I don't treat them like anything more than that, and that makes us get along great because it's all about the work, and that makes me feel good, but I was pinching myself going like, you were watching The Princess Bride when you were a kid, and now this guy is doing menial labor for you. It's like that's the part that I found like nearly impossible to deal with as a human being. It's like I was like, this is Prince Humperdinck. How could he be like doing this for me? Who the hell am I? And that's when you feel small as a person. It's like, I'm just this guy making a music video. He shouldn't be doing that for me. And yet Chris is such a like kind, wonderful man that it's more like working with Uncle Chris than working with somebody bringing a lot of star baggage with them or something like that. But he's just a consummate actor. He's just the real deal, a really wonderful man and a wonderful actor.
I did not know he was married to Joanna Gleason, though.
They have a great marriage. It was great, being in their house and like seeing those guys work together. I mean, they didn't have any scenes together, but they were like, like just seemed like this great husband and wife team. And it was really interesting hearing about like they acted together in some musical that didn't do very well. I think the way they've approached their lives is to say, let's make our lives outside of acting as full and as interesting and as enjoyable as possible. Because the life of an actor, no matter how successful you are, is tough.
Yeah.
They've created this they have an amazing house and they have a beautiful garden and like they have amazing interests outside of work. And they're just a beautiful team, like it's the kind of thing that it's like, wow, I hope that when I get married, my marriage is like that because they're so good together. And they're both brilliant actors. Joanna Gleason also was like, great to direct because, like Chris had already told her that we were good to work with. And she, remember how I was talking about people being difficult, like she kind of walked into it being like, all right, show me what you got. But then like once we started working, she was like really into it and really collaborative and fun and like inspiring. And she brought great things to the role and was very open to direction. And like we just played, it just felt like that felt like just like, like with Chris, it just felt really fun and it felt like really a pleasure to work with a really super talented actress. So, I mean, it was a privilege directing that music video. I'm really proud of how it turned out. It's a really weird video. It's very like, it's kind of the opposite of the narrative work that we're talking about. That's more like surreal, non-narrative, experimental stuff.
Yeah.
But I was really proud of how that video turned out. I really enjoyed making it, and I really loved the presentation of it as well. Aaron David Gleason's a great artist, and I love collaborating with him.
Yeah, I get that mixed up. It is Aaron David Gleason. There's a clip on there that has music from Jonathan Spottiswoode. I thought it was that one. See, that's what happens when I don't make notes.
Oh, it's okay. I mean, I'm trying to remember now which one I worked on with Spottiswoode because I love his music. Jonathan Spottiswoode is like a great, brilliant downtown New York City musician.
Yeah,
Uh,
I had never heard of him before, and then I heard the song, and I'm like, holy shit, that's because it's the type of music that I absolutely love.
oh, it must have
And
been the watch commercial that I did with music by
yes, yeah,
Spottiswoode.
that's what it was. Uh-huh.
Yeah, we were lucky to get Spottiswoode's music for that, because he's pretty choosy about what he puts his music on. But we were lucky to have his music.
I'll wrap this up, and I'm gonna ask you the cliched question that I ask filmmakers, which is, what advice would you have for filmmakers just starting out?
Wow, that's my question changes. My answer to that question changes depending on the day that you ask me. Because there are some days where I would answer, just don't do it. It's like it's really hard. But but I'll continue with that answer and say, like, if I said that to you, if I said just don't do it, don't do this to yourself. The life of a filmmaker is really hard, and it's just like you need to be stronger than you can possibly imagine to carry on. Don't do it. Don't do this to yourself. Like, you'll be. It's a rough life. If I told that to somebody and they kept going, then that's the kind of person that should be doing this, because people are going to say no and fuck you and get out of my face, or lie to you, or just, or whatever. I mean, like, it's just, it's a very demanding business after you've made the movie. So if you're the kind of person that can't stop, and you're going to do it even if people tell you to stop, then you're the kind of person that's going to be able to continue. I believe in making films. I actually think that this is an important tool. I think it's an important resource. I think it's a great way to communicate with the world. I think it's a great art form. I think it's a great entertainment. I think it does a lot of good, and I feel better living in a world where people can go out and make films, because they have a story to tell. So I would say, don't let anybody tell you you can't do it. And if you're that hungry and that dedicated, you will find a way. And then I would also say, don't expect it to happen overnight. Just be prepared to make like 300 really shitty, terrible movies. But I think that's the way to do it. Is like, just like, start making things without any, sense of like, this is going to go to Sundance or whatever. Put it on YouTube, figure out what the audience says, and do them really cheaply, and then keep doing it and keep getting better, and keep raising your personal bar so that you can improve, so that you can learn the ropes. And like, along the way, you'll learn how to talk to a director of photography. You'll learn about the difference between lenses. You'll learn about what edge light and fill light and backlight mean. You'll know how to talk to an actor and get them to, go in the direction that you want them to go in. Don't expect to learn those things overnight. That's a process. Uh, and have very thick skin, because if you're working with people more experienced than you are, they can be very demanding. It's like, if you don't know your business, people will certainly stick it to you. I think those are some pieces of advice, but it's really hard to advise anybody because all of our paths are so different. Like, it's something I like about the filmmakers that are marching along at the same time I am, guys like Patrick Ray or Richard Powell or Alfredo Arslisi or Bart Mastronardi, people, Alan Rokelly, people like that. It's like all of us are coming at it from a different place. All of us have different strengths and different weaknesses. All of us are finding a different inroad into making movies, and none of the stories of how we got to where we are really comparable. So you have to kind of blaze your own trail and be your own person. And those are the kind of filmmakers that I admire. It's like the people who have their own voice, who are doing their own thing. My advice to filmmakers is just like to keep going.
Well, that sounds like some good advice, and thanks for coming on, Jeremiah. I really enjoyed it. It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, what a great conversation, Scott. Thank you. Thanks for, it's like, it's really nice to have a conversation and and be faced with good questions that aren't just like, what's your budget? It was really great talking to you. Well, the pleasure was mine.
And we'll have links on the show page where you can find out more about Jeremiah and his work. as well as all the social media stuff. And if you enjoy the Imaginarium, check out our other shows in the Supernauts Network at thesupernauts.com. And until next time, may all your journeys be filled with pure imagination.